Thank you very much, Cindy, for this wonderful introduction. And also thank you very much, Esther, and Nelly, and other lecturers for inviting me to this session. As already mentioned, today we are going to speak about forensic psychology, professionally speaking, and also or from a research perspective. So I will start by sharing my screen. I guess, can you see now my PPT, my PowerPoint? Yeah,
Yep.
okay, great. Then I will share the full screen and start with the session. As mentioned, today my idea was to share a bit of my background in forensic psychology from a professional perspective as well as from the research perspective. I have already been introduced, so I am going to skip this part and going to be very fast. While I work as a lecturer here in Murcia, in the south of Spain, I am from the northern part, so if at any point you plan visiting Spain, you can always contact me for any kind of advices regarding any areas of Spain. Um, Going directly to the session, my idea for today, since we do have such a wide topic, but I wanted to do it or to introduce it briefly. We will just start with an introduction on forensic psychology, properly defining where is forensic psychology located inside the legal area, and we'll try to briefly understand the differences between forensic psychology and clinical psychology. And we'll try to share with you a bit of research on forensic psychology, focusing on my main areas of interest. And in the second part of this session, I will try to finish exploring the interests I have not yet explored in the rest of the session. If you remember, I asked you 1 month ago or so to tell me the questions or topics you were particularly interested in exploring. So based on that, I have built at least the second part of the session, trying to address some of the questions you arise from how forensic psychologists assess whether someone is criminally responsible, to the role of forensic psychologists across different legal systems, trying to explain, even if it is you just using a couple of sentences, the reliability of the tools in legal context and the methods that we generally use. So moving on from the introduction, let's start with it. Trying to introduce or to locate forensic psychology, it is necessary to speak about legal psychology. Indeed, when we are speaking about legal psychology, we are speaking about psychology applied to the justice system. How can psychology help in general in the justice system? It tends to be confounded with forensic psychology because indeed forensic psychology refers to the assessment and provision of evidence eh, in the decision process, in the decision-making process inside the legal system. But when we are speaking about legal psychology, we are also speaking about testimony psychology, penitentiary and preventive, criminal psychology, or even victimology psychology applied to the victims. As I understood from your questions and your interest is more in legal psychology than only focusing in how to specifically assess, how to specifically apply the techniques in the code. So this session will be focused mainly in forensic psychology, as I work as a forensic psychologist, but also in these other areas. Um, Starting with these different areas in forensic psychology, we can start speaking about testimony. There is going to be a branch of this legal psychology designed or devoted in identifying variables related to the validity and reliability of the witness testimonies. Indeed, when we are speaking about well, a normal case of an abuse or something like that, there are going to be a lot of occasions in which we only have the testimony of the victim as the tool of charge, as a proof of charge. So identifying the identifying whether the testimony is real or not is going to be a task that we as forensic psychologists will have to deal with. Also, a lot of you were interested in preventive psychology, not that much in penitentiary, but preventive in terms of which type of treatments or therapies could be applied to perpetrators um, of different aggressions of different crimes. We will try to focus on that at the second part of the lecture. And when speaking about criminal psychology, a lot of you arose questions about criminal profiling. So it is true that there is also going to be an area inside this whole forensic legal cloud designed or devoted in analyzing the variables, in initiating, maintaining, and seizing the criminal behavior, though this is going to be an area more research related. It is true that there are a lot of CSI, FBI series using criminal profiling, and while it is a professional area of interest, at least from my experience, it is not that much applied in the professional context, but in the research one. We will speak about it a bit more about it later. And last but not least, also, it is important to consider any kind of information related to psychology applied to victims or the field of victimology in terms of studying people who have been the passive subjects of a crime, in order mainly to identify the risk factors and avoid them to happen again, and the protective factors to promote them, and also to reduce the consequences. However, most of you are here for speaking about forensic psychology. So, specifically focusing on this field of legal psychology, we are speaking about a psychologist acting as an expert in cases requiring any kind of competence about the study of human behavior. So if we focus or we try to think the types of cases in which the legal system would need the expertise of a psychologist, we could speak about what I have already mentioned, this idea of validating the testimony of a witness or a victim. For example, as mentioned, and while it is a bit sad, but it is also necessary to mention, most of the cases I receive, and when I say most, I imply around 80% of the cases I receive are about child sexual abuse, which does not imply that we are speaking about a rape situation, but we are speaking about any kind of abuse, either being hidden or also any kind of sexual offense. And in fact, in most of these cases, we do not have any other biological proof, any other witness. We only have the testimony of the victim. So assessing, validating the credibility of this testimony is going to be vital for the proper functioning of the code. Also, we are going to work, and so there are a lot of cases in which we need to evaluate the psychological damage in cases of any kind of abuse, intimate partner violence, mobbing, bullying. A lot of consequences are not going to be physical, so are not going to be that easily observed. So in this case, the role of a psychologist is also going to be crucial, assessing whether this abuse has created any kind of disorder or anxiety symptoms, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, any kind of psychological consequences. Other topics in which we can help in situations when two parents are divorced and they have some kinds of disagreements about the custody. So mediating, assessing the parent suitability, who is the best parent to take care of the children. There, the role of a psychologist is also going to be vital. uh, most of you focused in your questions in this situation when someone is suspected of having committed a crime, speaking about the liability of that crime, was this person in his or her own full capacities? Did he know what he was doing? Could he? And I sometimes fall into speaking about males, because generally when speaking about crimes, we are assessing males. However, he or she was fully aware of the situation and was able to behave according to that awareness. So assessing all these cognitive and volitive capacities, and also risk assessment. I will also give you a couple of examples about risk assessment in order basically to avoid re-victimization and recidivism in terms of I have already committed a crime, am I at high or a low risk of committing it committing it again. If you see in all these cases, while the reality is that at least in Spain, but for up to my knowledge in most other countries, in other countries, um, we are vital, we are necessary. Generally, our reports are not vinculant, which means that I can say that the testimony of the victim is fully valid, it is credible, it has passed all my tests, but still it is the judge, the one who is going to take the final decision. We are there just as an aid. Let's try to speak about the differences between a clinical and a forensic psychologist, focusing on this specific example whenever someone files a complaint alleging any kind of psychological damage. Let's say that I have been victimized, I don't know, for example, because of an aggression, any kind of aggression, someone found me in a dark street and beat me. If I ask you in this kind of situation to assess psychological variables, it is very likely that most of you would think about depression, also assessing anxiety. Maybe some of you even think about assessing post-traumatic stress disorder in terms of trying to find this link, self-esteem, or even any other psychological variable that might be related to this specific victimization situation, which is fine. It is perfectly a perfectly valid assessment, and it is what we have to do. But this is what we would do both from a clinical and from a forensic perspective. But when we are in a forensic assessment, we also have to focus on different, I was going to say variables or topics. It is vital for us to find this causal link between the situation of victimization and the consequences that I am showing. Let's say that, for example, I assess this person who had suffered this aggression, and I have to observe. I use the widely known questionnaire, this style, the state trait anxiety inventory, and I do observe that this person presents high exposing and general anxiety in this state and trait anxiety. Can I say that this anxiety is coming from the victimization situation? Well, indeed, I cannot say that. I cannot say that because I don't know if this person was already anxious because before the aggression, and now this anxiety that I am just assessing is not derived from the aggression, but it is derived from the person's own personality, or because of a prior situation, or because of a different situation at job, at home, or wherever. In fact, when we are assessing anxiety, we are just assessing anxiety. We're just evaluating anxiety. There is no one specific type of anxiety that only appears when you have been agreed, or that only appears when you have been victimized. So at this point, we will have to deeply evaluate this causal link. which means not only evaluating anxiety after the event, but also trying to assess how the anxiety of this person was before the event. So that if I observe that before the event, this person was not taking any pills, any medicine, that this person was going to his or her job normally, but after the event, I can observe that this behavior has changed. Now, this person requires medicine to go with anxiety. Now, this person requires this person is on a sick leave because of this anxiety, maybe I can start see my words, maybe I can start inferring this causal link. There is another diagnosis that I was going to say. I am generally very happy when I observe it during an assessment, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder, but understand what I say or how I say this idea of being happy. It is not that I am happy for the person, but if I do observe that there is a post-traumatic stress disorder after the event and that any kind of experience that they are avoiding is related to the event, let's say that I was the one suffering this victimization situation. I was agreed on a narrow street when I was walking in the darkness, and now I always avoid walking in the darkness. It is 9 o'clock in the evening, and I am at home, and I do not dare to go outside. Now I start seeing causal links between the victimization situation and my symptoms, the symptoms that I am showing. So that variable is a variable that I will have to deeply focus on, because otherwise I will committing I will fall into a lot of biases. And also, since we are in a forensic situation, we always have to work with the malengineering hypothesis, so that the person is trying to deceive us, is trying to simulate symptoms. In this specific situation, probably this person, the one who has filed the complaint, is going to receive some kind of economic um, um, not finding the word, but some kind of money if the perpetrator is found guilty in order to re- to pay for the, so to say, so to speak, you understand me, to pay for the symptoms that this person has caused. So I will be prone to simulate or to exaggerate my symptoms in order to, in the end, receive more money. So that is another variable that I will have to assess. Now, if I ask you how we can assess this, well, the causal link, I have already mentioned it. So, temporal relationship, consistency of symptoms, so that those are typically related to this specific victimization experience, the PTSD. And about the malengineering, keep in mind that when we are assessing this kind of situations, or when we are, even in clinical psychology, is necessary to triangulate. It is necessary to use different tools in order to assess the same hypothesis. So it is not that I am only using an interview to evaluate the symptoms. I am using an interview and a questionnaire, and maybe observing how you relate to other people, and maybe different um, methods in order to reach the same variable. So combining all this information, I will be closer to see any inconsistencies between what you are saying, what you are doing, what you are reporting on a self-reported questionnaire. But furthermore, all the self-reported questionnaires that I use, that we generally use in the forensic context, are going to have validity scales of the symptoms. So they are going to assess if the person is exaggerating their symptoms, if it is trying to simulate, if it is trying to show that they are faking good, faking bad, show that they are suffering something that it is not suffering. All these tools have been validated and are very specific in assessing all these ideas. So in the end, if I am observing that maybe the information that I have received in the interview does not match with what the person is actually doing and does not match with the information received in the self-reported questionnaires, and furthermore, I am observing that the tools developed to measure simulation are telling me, be careful, this person might be simulating. This person is trying to show some symptoms that generally do not appear together. Maybe at that point, I do start thinking, maybe this person is trying to deceive me. So I am not going to give that much validity to the information that I have collected. Um, Always also when speaking about forensic cases and also trying to address one of your questions, we are always going to work with hypotheses. While during clinical practice, we can work or we can assess someone by using questionnaires, interviews, and use the information and start building our assessment. Always when working in a forensic case, we are always going to work based on previously designed hypotheses, because we are going to work with an objective, and the objective is to answer the question proposed by the court. If the court tell us, please, can you, this idea, the same idea that I was speaking now, can you assess the psychological consequences? I'm going to have an hypothesis that this person suffers this specific psychological hypothesis. And another hypothesis also considering that this person is malengineering. And another hypothesis also considering that this person is suffering from these symptoms, but the symptoms are not derived from the specific victimization situation. And based on that, I start contrasting that hypothesis. So I am not falling into my own biases based on the information I have received in the interview. Generally, a lot of times, we are not good in assessing credibility. We are not good in knowing whether someone is lying us. So we don't need to work this way. We don't need to work as machines, so to say, or technicians in the psychology field. While in in clinical psychology, we can use a more artistic approach or a more creative approach. In forensic psychology, we have to be like technicians in terms of we just have a clear evaluative approach. I don't mind if the person gets bored while filling out my questionnaires. I don't mind if I am not. I am interested in building a good rapport. I am interested in building a good working relationship, but I am not that much interested in building trust, because I will be all the time considering that the person is going to deceive me, or that the person can have any hidden interests. So I am going to be fair, to be open with the person, but always stating that the summary of what my conclusions, that my report is going to be shared, is going to be available for the court, so that everything shared inside this room is going to be shared with the court. So when speaking about the forensic practice, there is no confidentiality. The results of our assessment, since are asked from a court, are also shared with the code. This is different if we are working for the code or we are working for the person itself. If we are not a forensic psychologist. if we are directly hired by this client, we are still going to objectively evaluate and objectively answer the question we have been asked, that we are going to share our report with the client itself. And it is the client the one that can decide whether to present it in the code or not. But that are no small differences that are directly related to the specific legal system we are speaking about. And later when addressing your interest, we will also focus or try to answer another situation of those that I have presented, but let's try to follow the order I have prepared. And now I just wanted to speak a little about research fields in forensic psychology, as some of you might be interested in pursuing a research career in this area. In fact, when we are speaking about research in forensic psychology, we are going to speak about how can we help to work better in this field. So improve the methods, improve the techniques used in different areas. If, for example, we are speaking about preventive or penitentiary psychology, developing and assessing rehabilitation programs, or developing and assessing risk assessment tools. If we are speaking about testimony, factors that can influence the reliability of the witnesses, memory, how memory works, how suggestibility works, if we can discriminate between a real memory or an invented one, all the research that surrounds these topics can also be um, related to research in forensic psychology, testimony psychology, legal psychology. If we are speaking about forensic psychology, developing, validating specific assessment tools and protocols in order to answer specific questions. And anything related to victimology is also going to be a field of interest, evaluating factors that might contribute to victimization, consequences, how to decrease these consequences. All these fields are going to be part of this whole legal psychology field. Have I heard something? Okay, I will continue. When speaking about criminal psychology, since it is my area of expertise, now I'm going to stop a bit here, but basically it is this area that in which we could introduce all this idea of criminal profiling, which is no more than trying to locate the specific variables that will help us in predicting and explaining the criminal activity. So, for example, or at least the ones that I am interested in, since here at UCAM, I do teach, my subjects are basically assessment psychology, psychological assessment, sorry, and personality psychology. So my field of interest are all these personality variables that are related to criminal or antisocial behaviors. Speaking about criminal and antisocial behaviors like intimate partner violence, bullying, online sexual victimization, trolling, sexual aggression, any kind of these variables. However, when speaking about forensic criminal psychology, criminal profiling, I guess that since you are already, I think, psychologists or more or less, you all have heard about the ecological model of Bronfer-Brenner, in which we, in order to understand behavior, we are not only taking into account the individual variables, those that are within the individual, but also the different systems, the different variables surrounding the individual, the family, the school, the country, the cultural background. All these variables are also going to be of interest in order to understand, explain, and be able to predict the criminal or antisocial behaviors. In this sense, just for you to know, my main area of interest is personality psychology focused on the trait approach. You all have heard about the Big Five, Exaco models, maybe Cadell's 16PF, or even Eysenck's pen. However, when we try to understand criminal behavior using these models, while we can still do it, we do have this psychoticism, variable independent model, we do have neuroticism, agreeableness, honesty, humility in the Exaco and Big Five models. The reality is that there is a lot of research carried on in a concept that is known the dark triad of personality. Nowadays, we generally research the dark tetrad of personality. And these are just, we are just speaking about specific personality traits that are highly related to criminal behavior, to antisocial behavior. When we speak about the dark triad, we are speaking about subclinical level of traits. So it is not that we are dealing with a antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. We are dealing with tendencies of behavior related to this antisocial personality disorder, tendencies of behavior related to this psychopathy from a clinical perspective. So we are speaking about subclinical psychopathy, subclinical narcissism, as if we are speaking at someone who doesn't, when speaking about this subclinical psychopathy, someone who does not tend to suffer, to feel, generally who does not care about the consequences of his, I'm still going to say his, because these traits are, or you will understand, even if I don't like to use the word prevalent with personality traits, are more prevalent in male population. So people who are highly impulsive, who tend to engage in risky behaviors, in risky conducts, with disinhibited behavior, callous, who generally lack of remorse by the things they do to other people. When we speak about subclinical narcissism, we are speaking about this idea of narcissism that we have, but probably in a higher rate as someone who presents an exploitative interpersonal style with self-promoting behaviors, with an explicit high self-esteem, generally also related to being very sensible to criticism, which also makes them react to reacts antisocially, reacts aggressively to threats to this ego. And when speaking about Machiavellianism, that maybe you have already heard about, we are just speaking about someone who is very strategic, who is very manipulative, who generally tends to use other people for their own interests. So we are speaking about this type of personality. And the last trait that is used in order to build this dark tetrad is the everyday sadism, in which we could be speaking about someone who receives some kind of pleasure from harming others or from observing other people suffering. So I don't know, in order for you to understand, we are still not speaking about a pathological trait. We are speaking about someone, and if, for example, you are observing a gore movie or you are observing a couple of people fist fighting, and you can, even if you don't like it, it is hard for you to stop watching. Maybe at that point, it is where we are when we are speaking about this everyday sadism, these tendencies in behavior. So just I was mentioning these traits because my main areas of interest are to understand how these traits, well, I'm going to relates to different types of behavior. So starting from how are these individual variables related to inflicting pain in others, such as how are they related to aggressive behaviors, or how are they related specifically to some specific types of behaviors. For example, my PhD in the end is about how all these traits are related to, or how they affect intimate relationships. So we have conducted several research on the relationship between these traits and inmate partner relationships, perpetration of inmate partner abuse, perpetration of sexual online victimization, bullying victimization, sexual aggression. But not only these, the relationship between these behaviors, but also, for example, with the propensity towards lying. If I ask you, do you think that a psychopath, a Machiavellian person, a narcissistic person would generally try to lie to us? You probably would say, yes, of course. It is part of their nature. Well, that is half of the answer. On one hand, it is part of their nature, but on the other hand, they don't care about what other people think of them. So what we found is that on anonymous settings, in low stakes situations, these people do not tend to lie. So the same way they are open to tell us they enjoy seeing other people suffering, they are also going to be honest with us. However, in high stakes situations, we do know that these people are going to lie more and also explore the relationship. We have already also explored the relationship between these traits and different interesting psychological constructs, as for example, emotional intelligence. Nowadays, we do have a project in order to analyze the role of empathy inside these traits. We do know that these traits are related to lower empathy, but we do also know that there is something called in there called the dark empath, which are people who are high on these traits, but also high in empathy. So people who want to use you and that are perfectly able to understand you. So we are interested in knowing how this dark empath profile relates to other type of behaviors. If empathy asks as a protective factor or if it asks as a risk factor. And another area of interest inside all these traits is to answer or not to answer because this is already answered, but to explore the question whether mean people, these malevolent personalities, are born or made. And in this area, we could speak about a lot of different factors related to the development of these traits. We are already carrying some research in order to evaluate how different contextual factors can affect the development of these traits. For example, this year, we published our research that was designed to see how the different discipline tactics used during childhood would affect the development of these traits. So if your parents use physical aggression to teach you how to behave, this in the end is going to be related to higher scores in psychopathy, higher scores in Machiavellianism, sadism, which we could explain from evolutionary approaches, but also from behavioral ones. It is about trying to explore the role of the genetic predispositions, trying to explore the role of the culture in explaining the different levels of these traits, trying to explain the role of the context itself. I was just mentioning this because you were also interested in knowing how people become, based on your answers, you were also interested in knowing how people could become criminals. And in fact, we cannot only speak about a single cause, but a combination of causes. It is always going to be multi-causal, starting from the genetic predispositions, the biological causes, combined, not added, combined with the contextual variables. And when it comes to contextual variables, we can include almost everything we can think of. Cognitive variables, the way we interpret, we analyze behavior, not only cognitive but behavioral variables, how we have learned all this conductual approach, how we have behavioral approach, how we have learned to behave, the culture we are living in, all these type of variables can help us in understanding criminal behaviors. Again, we do not have time to go deeper into each of these variables, but I wanted to address this concern that you had. Now in the second part, well, now we move to the second part. This was the first part in order to give you a brief overview of what forensic psychology is, not only from the professional side, but also from the research part. And now, since I know that with this part, I was missing some of your concerns, I wanted to address the rest of the questions, at least maybe superficially, but that you receive some kind of answer from my own experience. We have already more or less spoken about those issues, even if you spoke about them as psychological issues. I am more interested in understanding the contextual and biological factors related to understanding criminal behavior, also a bit on the methods and tools used to evaluate malengineering, removing bias, also this idea of confidentiality and legal obligations. But now I saw that I was not mentioning anything about how to assess whether someone is criminally responsible or how to apply some principles in maybe profiling, but most of its support in rehabilitation, and in the end, how to build a career, how to push a career on this field. So starting from the first one, these are some of your questions. And as I mentioned, going back to the situation, to the different situations in which we could use the expertise of a psychologist in a trial, um, we can speak about the situation of when someone has committed or is suspected of having committed a crime, and we have to evaluate if this person is liable, if this person was able to understand and act accordingly to the situation. So let's imagine, for example, let's put a simple example that someone has beaten and robbed someone to buy drugs. I need drugs so much that, and I do not have money, that I need to rob someone. So I have beaten and robbed this person. If I ask you the variables that you would assess, maybe this case is a bit more complicated than the previous one, as it is not that much related to this clinical psychology side. But in this case, we can evaluate a lot of variables, but also all of the specific variables we are going to evaluate are going to be derived from evaluating cognitive and volitive capacities. In order to answer the questions that I was raising before, does the person understand that what they've done is wrong? And is the person able to control their behavior based on this understanding? So, in order to see whether the person has understand what they have done, we have can evaluate executive functions in general. Is this person able to plan? Is this person able to inhibit behavior? Is how does the working memory of this person works? Cognitive flexibility. I am also always going to evaluate intelligence, memory, attention, different cognitive capacities, but also the volitive ones, in order to evaluate mainly impulse control. Is this person able to control their impulses? How bad have the drugs affected him? Are there any other motivational factors that could affect the lack of impulse control at that moment? Were there any other stressors affecting him or her in that specific situation? And I am going to evaluate that not only after the event when I am with that person, but also try to evaluate it before and during the event, because we know that during the specific event, not in this case, but let's imagine that now this person has already consumed, has already taken some drugs, so that now this person does not need drugs anymore, so this person is perfectly able to control their impulses, not going to agree with anyone. But what happens when this person is on an absentist situation? Maybe this person starts behaving differently, so I need to know how this person is going to react in different situations. How can I do this? Well, still, we are going to triangulate, we are going to use different tools, different approaches, starting by interviews, but also self-reported questionnaires. We are going to rely a lot on neuropsychological assessment or other types of records. If I do have records of this person being institutionalized because of a previous similar situation, that is going to give me a lot more information. What I just wanted you to understand based on your questions here is that here I am going to be very much interested in assessing cognitive and volitive capacities. If the person is able to understand what they've done, if, for example, we have someone with an intelligence coefficient of 50, that person is not able to understand that what they've done, what this person, what they have done, is wrong, as well as it is not able to understand most of the things that are happening around him. So it is not going to be as liable as someone with an intelligence coefficient of 120, who is perfectly able to understand what's happening around him or around her. And still, as well as in the previous example, we will need to evaluate that this person is not trying to simulate or to dissimulate. Because in this case, I will be interested in pretending to be worse than I really am. Because maybe I can avoid prison, instead go to a psychiatric hospital. So evaluating simulation here is also going to be a key factor, this malengineering that we were speaking before, as well as the causal link between all the stressors and the positive affectance on volitive capacities. I just wanted to mention this example so that you have an image. Of course, with these 5 minutes of speaking about this, you are not now a forensic psychologist able to assess this case, but at least I hope that I have shed light into the variables, at least, or the constructs that we are generally interested when assessing these cases. I have just given you the most simple case. The reality is that when we face a situation like this, it is not as easy to see, okay, this person has assaulted and robbed this person because of this absenteeism syndrome. Generally, there are a lot of grays in between. Maybe this person was understanding the situation until this point, but later they do not understand. The reality usually makes things way harder. Continuing with your questions and almost finishing, I also wanted to address the role of forensic psychologists in rehabilitation, basically using my own experience working as one. And the reality is that when we are speaking about rehabilitation, we will have to work hand by hand with clinical psychologists in terms of um, we will have to approach the treatment in a very similar way, in which we are not going to use, I put everything, in which we are not going to use the same approach for every person, even if we can build groups, because we assume that some of the factors the risk factors that were related to the perpetration of that crime are going to be common. The reality is that if you have someone suffering from OCD in front of you, and a week later you have another person suffering from OCD, even if your treatment, if the treatments that you applied on both people can look similar because you are treating similar risk factors, similar symptoms, the reality is that you will have to address the specific variables that are related to both OCDs, the same way that two depressions are not similar to perpetrators of the same crime are not going to present the same contributing factors. They present the same factors that will make them more prone to recidivism. From my experience, a couple of years ago, when I had time, I used to work for a couple of years as a group therapist for people who were convicted for gender violence, for a type of inmate partner violence. The reality is that I could observe a lot of different profiles, a lot of different typologies, a lot of different um, um, people in the end. So usually addressing them with this idea of the risk, need, responsibility approach, assessing each of the risks of each of the perpetrators, and based on their needs, create the limitation, the treatment is going to be a more effective approach. The reality is that generally we lack we lack the funds for these individualized treatments. So we generally tend to use this one size fits all approach in which one day we speak about empathy and how to be more empathetic, and another day we speak about emotions and how to deal and regulate them, which is fine, is going to help a lot of them. Those that are not helped will probably receive something and will learn something, but the reality is that if we want to be effective, we should tailor treatments to each of the specific offender based on their specific risk factors, and also trying to strengthen their protective factors. And I was just speaking from my experience from inmate partner violence groups, but we could um, use the same explanation to any other type of crime. And when speaking about this idea of criminal profiling, since most of you were interested in how criminal profiling is used in legal settings, the reality is that I have never worked on this area. I can just give you a brief overview on how it is done, but still it is about, if we have one specific type of crime, trying to see based on the literature, based on the research, which type of factors are related to that specific crime. So if I do know that generally people who commit sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, are people within the family, tend to be men, then I can start narrowing my list of subjects. So it is how it works. Based on research, we can start delimiting, we can start delineating the characteristics of the offender. In something that I have worked a bit more is on this idea of risk assessment, which relies on the same assumption from a different perspective. So trying to understand that behavior reflects personality, in the end, we are going to work with probabilities. If I do know that it is very likely that this for example, in the case that I have worked, which is still intimate partner violence, that it is very likely that those perpetrators who are more likely to kill their wives are those suffering from a lot of stressors, and are those who are impaired by a separation process, and that there are a lot of economic issues or other type of stressors. In that specific cases, when I have assessed them, I will put more surveillance, more vigilance on the victim, because I know that this victim is at a higher risk. Thus, I can protect her. In this case, we were speaking about males and females. I can protect her in a better way. So using what science knows about criminal profiling, about perpetrator characteristics as well as victim characteristics in order to define who is at a greater risk, and based on that, to work with different protocols. That would be the idea. And finishing with all your questions and also finishing with the lecture, I wanted to at least to tell you my own experience because I read several comments inquiring about how to build a career in forensic psychology. I did an official master here in Spain, but that enables me or allows me to work as a forensic psychology. But the reality is that training and credentials are going to vary significantly across countries. Maybe in one country you can work as clinicians in forensic settings. Maybe in another country you are not allowed. For example, here in Spain, while you can work without any forensic credential, only with clinical credentials in forensic settings, it is, I would say that it is not possible because you do need, even if it is possible, it is not advised because you do need to have some expertise in this field in order not to commit errors that can put someone in prison. So that in the end, we have to be very clear, very good, and very sure on what we are doing in this specific field. So usually at least, I say at least, a master's on forensic psychology or legal psychology is needed. You may need some system, basically because the role of the forensic psychology is it going to be shaped by the structure and the demands of each country's legal system. The reality is that we are there in all the countries, in every country, we are there to answer questions. We are there to put psychology at service of the courts. But maybe the definition of mental illness might vary from one country to another. Maybe the definition of criminal responsibility of liability. Maybe the role of the expert testimony may vary. So the reality is that it varies from one country to another. Even if I work here in Spain, it would be complicated for me to adapt to the Portuguese legal system, which is only 100 kilometers away from here. So we have to know about different legal systems and have a deep base, a very profound base on the role of the forensic psychologist, on the tools, on how to answer the different questions using a scientific approach, using an objective and scientific approach. And with this, well, these are all the references that I have used in the different slides. And with this, I finish the introduction to forensic psychology. I hope I have explored your interest while telling a bit about my experience, not only my expertise in research, but also a bit on my professional expertise. And I am completely open to any question you may have to me. I hope I have stick to the suggested time, and now I can see you and hear you and read the chat. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Manuel, for such an insightful presentation. So students, let's give Manuel a big virtual round of applause.
Thank you. Even if I cannot hear it, I can see it. Thank you very much.
From your presentation, we've seen forensic psychology offers valuable insights by connecting psychology and law. So it helps us better understand criminal behavior, support legal processes, and contribute to public safety. It is a truly unique and impactful area of study. So no wonder forensic psychology is such a popular interest among our students. All right, now we will move on to the Q&A session. Student, if you have any question, please type them in the chat or raise your hands to ask directly. Maybe while we wait for question from the Zoom participants, perhaps we can start with the students who are here with me in the class. Oke, oke. Satu dulu ya.
Um, Hello, Mr. Manuel. I'm Jolin. I want to ask something related to criminal psychology. So, I find criminology very interesting, and maybe some of my friends here have the same experience where they get fascinated with this work field through the lens of thriller and criminal movies. So, I was considering to study further and work in this field. However, I wonder if this work field truly suits me. So my question would be, what are the struggle or things that most people aren't aware of when they decided to jump into this work field? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, and nice meeting you. Well, I was the same. I did remember when I decided when I was 18 years old and I was deciding what to study. I loved criminology because probably the same as you, but indeed here in Spain, working as a criminologist is very hard because it is not. I wouldn't say well seen profession, but there are not a lot of career opportunities. So that was why I decided to study psychology. But when in my last year of psychology, I started studying criminology just for pure interest in order to understand all these factors that I was mentioning before. And the reality is that I think that as well as you probably that we made the right choice because indeed we are interested in the psychological factors related to criminal behavior. So it is going to be always better to start by the psychological part of the factors and later to understand the criminal behavior. Again, on the things that I could struggle the most, it is still, I don't know about the Indonesian situation, but at least in Spain, it is that this profession is not very well regulated, which means that someone without any idea on forensic psychologist, this is why I try to focus on that in the previous, in the almost last slide, can also prepare a report for a court. And that is, in the end, a problem for us as a profession because we are not being taken seriously in terms of if the court asks for something and someone without enough background is trying to answer that question, in the end, that is working against us. On the things that I found most difficult, start working as a forensic psychologist, offering the services. It is the same, I would say, the same as working as a clinical psychologist, in which you can promote yourself using social media, using websites, using different apps. But the reality is that your audience, your target is going to be a lot more specific. You are not that much interested in meeting people, but a lot more interested in meeting lawyers. So having meeting with lawyers, meeting people related to the legal system that when they need something, they are able to call you. Also conducting research on this field so that whenever they meet an expert on something, let's say that I would be an expert on witness testimony, whenever they need an expert on a witness testimony for a case, they can call you. And these kind of things, I think that is what makes things a bit more complex, difficult, and struggle more with, because it is the career, it is not that clearly designed as the clinical career, where you see all the possibilities you have, the different clinics, that you can become a consultant, that you can become different. Here you have to build your own way, your own path. Have I answered your question more or less, Liz? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. That was very insightful. The second question is also from my class. After that, we can move to the question from the Zoom participants.
All right, hello, Mr. Manuel. My name is Joanna. You can call me Jo if you want the short one. Actually kind of interested in the motives of preparators from the field that you study, which is forensic psychology. But if speaking about motives, you mentioned a lot of psychopathology like depression, bipolar, or something like that, that indicates in clinical psychology. But how can all the psychopathology being the motives? Like, is it like the distress from the
I have sorry. Could you go back because the video stopped and I have not understood your question. Could you go back to where you mentioned depression and
Okay, I was quite interested in the field that you study, which is the disorder, personality disorder that contributes the motives of the killers or the perpetrators. But if speaking about motives, you mentioned a lot of psychopathology like depression, bipolar, and etc. But how can all that psychopathology being the motives? Like, is there a distress in it that caused the criminal's behavior or any other explanation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I understood you. What I mentioned was in fact that we are generally interested in understanding the characteristics and the traits that are more related to committing any kind of crimes, to perpetrate any kind of antisocial behaviors. Within that field, we can start locating specific traits. And the ones I mentioned, since I am the ones I conduct research on, are these personality traits, not psychopathology, traits, though they are related, of psychopathy, narcissism, and so on. The reality is that if later we start observing different psychopathological symptoms that could be related to different types of criminal behaviors, it is not as easy as saying depression is going to cause someone to perpetrate an antisocial behavior, or OCD is going to cause someone to be victimized by. We have to focus on the specific variables, as you also mentioned in the question, to the specific variables of these psychopathological disorders that could help us in explaining why this person committed that crime. For example, let's say I am going to make it up that we are speaking about this example that you mentioned, in which someone in the end is suffering from some kind of depression. It is not the depression itself, the one that is related to committing a crime, but maybe that they are stressed out, or the other stressors they are suffering that are committing that generating depression, or develop or related to the depression, the ones that are going to affect eh, the risk of committing that specific crime that we are speaking about. So that I would then say psychopathology related to, maybe if we are speaking about antisocial personality disorder as one psychopathological type, that one is going to be related to crimes, because it is basically its definition. But I wouldn't that much, I would never speak about psychopathology explaining crimes, because in the end, psychopathology is a problem itself, and we should focus on the factors generating the psychopathology and the individual factors generating the crime. I don't know if I have answered your question, but my point is not that much to focus on the big picture, but to focus on the specific variables related to the specific crimes itself, because we are never going to be able to focus or to mention this trait is related to crime. We will always have to focus in the type of the crime, the specific factors related to the crime, to the specific typology. Have I answered? I hope. That is that's a very interesting question, and I would like to answer it using the concepts that we have already seen during the session. In that case, I would always, or we would always, these are very rare cases, as you mentioned, but we will always need to assess the cognitive and volitive capacities during this murder that we are speaking. So during that moment, was the person fully aware of what they were doing, fully understood, and was able to react accordingly and behave accordingly? When we are speaking about different personalities, probably that specific personality was able to, but it is very likely that this is not the full personality of the person we are dealing with. So in that case, this type of disorder, at least here in Spanish regulation, would be sent to a psychiatric hospital instead to a prison, because this person wouldn't be fully liable of that crime. But we would have to deeply evaluate that this person during that moment was suffering from a dissociation so that they could not control the behavior. Okay.
All right. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. First, thank you so much, Mr. Manuel, insightful, for the insightful presentation. But I would like to ask, since you had mentioned a lot regarding the etiology of psychopathology, I was curious. Since forensic psychologists work with the court, does a lot of their work involve case by case, where they look into a victim prior to court proceedings, and who are the characters that forensic psychologists are most likely to work with in those cases?
Thank you very much, Adrian, for your question. You were speaking about characteristics of the victims, right? What type of characteristics do you refer to? I'm not fully sure that I am understanding your question.
Sorry, I'm referring to since forensic psychologists work closely with court proceedings, will they commonly be present during the court proceeding itself? And prior to court proceedings, when researching regarding the victim or anyone involved, um, who will they most likely work with? Would it be people close with the people who are directly related to the victims, or is it other psychologists who are also looking into it?
Now I understand you. It totally depends on the answer is a typical psychological answer. It totally depends on the case. It depends on the situation. If we are starting from the first part of the question, if we are required to be during the trial, we are going to be there in order to offer our expert knowledge based on the assessment that we have conducted. And about your second answer, it is not only that we are going to work with the victim, but we are going to work, generally speaking, again, we will have to speak case by case, but generally speaking, I will try to obtain information from as many different perspectives as I can, which means not only information from the victim, but even also if I come from the perpetrator, even also if I come from the context of the victim and the context of the perpetrator, to become the expert, to become the person who knows most about the situation. Typically, in some situations, I am only going to be able to assess the victim, but in some other situations, I am only going to be able to assess the perpetrator. But if I am allowed, yeah, I can, and all the parts agree, I will try to have as much information about the whole context, which implies not only victim perpetrator, but also context of them, people who are related, and different variables of interest. Have I answered your question?
Just one more thing. In the case where the victim or the perpetrator, anyone involved, does have any diagnosable psychopathology, would they be diagnosed prior to the case proceeding?
I am going to be generally I'm going to be interested in knowing if they have been diagnosed prior to the proceeding, not prior to the proceeding, but prior to the cause that leads the proceeding. So if, for example, the same example I gave before, if we are speaking about drug abuse, I am going to be very much interested in knowing that this person was previously diagnosed and that it is not alleging that he is suffering from drug abuse or from drug addiction because he wants to receive a lower sure, basically, you understand me, that they don't want to use this symptomatology or this psychopathology as an attenuant. Huh? Have I answered now?
Yes, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
What an insightful discussion. I think we have time for one more question. It is from Mary Jane. In the contemporary research landscape, the use of artificial intelligence has become increasingly prominent, particularly in the field of psychology, where it is frequently employed to support data collection and analysis. From an academic standpoint, where are your views on the potential integration of AI within forensic psychology? For instance, could AI be utilized to optimize the reliability and validity of forensic assessment tools and research methodologies?
Thank you very much, Marianne, for this question. It is indeed very interesting. However, I want to set the disclaimer before answering it that I am not an expert in AI and that I do not use it. Therefore, my answer is not going to be deeply based on knowledge, but only on my opinion. While it can be and it is being, for what I know, used in terms of assessment in order to help in the hypothesis and help analyzing the results. The reality is that, at least from my perspective, I am still working the same way while using the AI maybe to help me analyze the results or see connection between elevations in different scales. In fact, things that I would do myself, but sometimes by using AI, I'm just saving some time. That is my own experience. I am only using AI, or I do only use AI in forensic settings in order to save time, but I am looking for the results I know I am going to find. I know I would find by myself, not that I am just trying to fulfill my expectancies. The results that I know I would find, but saving myself time. It is also true that AI, machine learning are being used as tools or methods in order to improve and generate more valid or reliable assessments. However, that is not a field that nowadays I am expert in. So I'm sorry not being able to fully answer your question, but at least I can tell you how I use it.
I see. Okay. Mary Jane, was that explanation clear to you? I hope it cleared. Okay.
Because, sorry for adding this, in fact, when we are working in a forensic setting, we truly need to use a validated tool. And since AI is that new, maybe using a tool that has not been proven previously is not the best practice, at least nowadays, until it has been assessed.
I see. Thank you. That was very insightful. Actually, I want to go through all the questions, but unfortunately, we have run out of time for the Q&A session. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's question today. Hopefully, some of those unanswered questions can be discussed further in your respective classes. Or who knows, maybe we will have another chance to hear more insight directly from Manuel in the future. Sky. Okay. So today we have explored profession and research in forensic psychology. We hope that what has been shared in this session has provided valuable insight and enriched your perspective on the field. A huge thank you to our guest speaker, Manuel Galan Morillo, for sharing his knowledge and expertise with us today. Thank you as well to all participants for your active engagement. But before we officially end today's session, I think we can take a group photo together. Kameli?
Yes, Cindy, I can help you with the group photo. So everybody can open your camera. Please open your camera. Give your best smile for about an hour because we have lots of participants here. Okay. There's still a lot of you. Open your camera, please. Okay. All right. I'll start the photo from page 1. Give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, please wait. Page 2. 1, 2, 3. Page 3. Oh, no one opened the camera. I think that is all for the group photo session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Amelie. All right, that brings our session to a close. Thank you all for your active participation and insightful discussions. Once again, let's give our speaker a big virtual round of applause. Special thank you once again for Manuel for sharing valuable insight with us. We truly appreciate your time. I hope we will have the opportunity to collaborate again in the future with you. So thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. See you
Bye.
around. Okay.
See you soon.
Thank you, students. Thank you, Kak Cindy.
Thank you very much.
See you next session. Yeah, yeah.
Bye
Yo,
bye.
bye. Thank you, Melly. Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye bye everyone. Tolong